Recording in progress. Okay, so this is Faith and Calm, class number 80. That's 80. Got the number right?
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Unbelievable. I agree.
Really.
I'm taken away by it. And today we're going to two little themes. So I wanted to get started quickly. Both of them on the last week's Parsha, which is relevant to everything about what's happening today. And the theme tonight is making you most of every single day of your life. That actually is how the Parsha begins. It says, this is the life of Sarah. She lived 100 years and 20 years and 7 years. And the commentators all say, you didn't have to say years every time. You could just say 127. Even in Hebrew, it's much easier to say just 127 years. So they explained, this says all of her years were equally good. And they say the same thing about Avraham, that all were holy, all were equally good. He lived 100 years and 70 years and 5 years. Now, why is that interesting? I mean, because it doesn't seem like all her years were so fantastic. I mean, she and Avraham basically stood off against the entire world. It was not easy. She saw her husband thrown in the furnace. Twice in her life, she was captured by non-Jewish kings and brought to their bedchambers and in order to protect her husband, and she was saved by a miracle, by angels. She was a barren until she was 90 years old, had no children. This is not a simple life. And then, of course, she died at 127, right after according to the Medrash, during the Akedah, she had a vision of her husband killing her son, and that was not pleasant. And she shrieked and she yelled and she passed away. Didn't happen, of course, but that's what something showed her. So this seems like a difficult life. And with Avraham, the first years of his life until he was 3 years old, or when he was 40 years old or 48 years old, he grew up in a house of idol worshipers, and he was an idol worshiper. So how can you say all the years were good? Okay, that's the question. And as usual in Judaism, you have to look at other things completely other, because it's all one big tapestry and it all interconnects. So sometimes one little detail in one area of Judaism and laws or something like that will reflect on the others. And we're going to come out with a very interesting lesson out of this too. So there happens to be a law about children. We're talking about bar mitzvah and preparing them for bar mitzvah. So there's a law that's called the chinuch. Father has an obligation, parents have an obligation to raise their children, to teach them about Judaism. But that law, according to all the opinions, is from the rabbis. It's not explicit in the Chumash. But you might ask, wait a second, I read the Shema. It is explicit. It says, Vishinantam levanecha, you should teach your children. So it is. We read it every day in the Shema. Vishinantam, and you shall... but the commentators explain that just means in general, intellectually, you have to give them an understanding about Judaism and about its laws and what it's about. However, actually training them, telling them, practice putting on your talis, and practice putting on your tefillin, and practice lighting the candle, practice fasting for Yom Kippur. All this stuff, actually, in order to do it, you just can't have it in your head. You have to actually participate in it. You can't just at 13 magically know it. So that is what the mitzvah that the rabbis added. That, the Rebbe says, sounds okay, but it has a significant problem in it. What's the problem? So the problem is, what about when the Jews came and were in the wilderness and they were all made Jewish at Har Sinai? They all were given the commandments at Har Sinai. So before that time, they were not doing the mitzvahs. They didn't even know about the mitzvahs. And then all of a sudden, they had these all plopped on their heads and they had to start doing everything. And they were required by law to do everything. So do we say that until they started mastering everything, they were all big Bale Averos doing sins left and right because they didn't know how to keep kosher or that, and they didn't know exactly, hadn't practiced it before, and they never knew about all these things? So we say that about that generation, and do the same thing with a person who converts. before he's a convert, he can't possibly know all the laws. And then he becomes a convert. All of a sudden, he's liable for all of these things. Nobody can become an expert and good at things until they practice it. It's just the nature of the world. So if you have to practice in order to be able to do something. So the rabbi said, okay, fine, we understand. You have to have a training beforehand. The Rebbe is saying that doesn't explain yet these two stories. So he comes up with an interesting thing. I'll illustrate it with an example that I heard. The example is as follows. When a soldier goes to war, he doesn't go right away into the front lines. They first send him to boot camp, and he goes through training. And that may take a couple months. And then as he's special forces, he has to do longer, and this he has to do, and this he has to do. All that time that he's training in the camp and he's not on the front lines fighting the war, do you say he's not a soldier yet? Or do you say he is a soldier? He's just a soldier in training. So the Rebbe says, yeah, exactly. He is a soldier, 100%. And his job right now is to train how to be the soldier that goes to the front line. And then afterwards, after he's trained, then his job is a little different. He's still a soldier, but now he's actually fighting the battle. So he says there are two parts in the mitzvah, phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1 is learning to do it. Phase 2 is doing it. But both of them are part of the mitzvah. You are doing the mitzvahs when you are learning the mitzvahs. When you are preparing, it's just nature of the world that in this world, people and bodies who have to learn, and it takes time for them to learn. And therefore, that process of learning is also considered very much part of actually fulfilling it. So getting the shofar for the shofar is also part of the mitzvah of the shofar. Buying the wood and getting the wood together for the sukkah is part of it. Learning how to put on put on tefillin is part of the mitzvah of tefillin. But it's not a separate thing. It is part of the mitzvah itself. Why is that interesting? Because it answers our question with Avraham Avinu. How could he be when he's for 3 years being an idolater, and he's compared to when he was later on when he accepted God and he was doing all that self-sacrifice for God? Because part of the mitzvah is searching. And part of being a Jew is searching to be a Jew. Part of the process of becoming who Avram was the search for truth. For becoming Avraham. Part of the search for truth is the part of the truth is the search for truth. It is not two separate things. You are actually doing what Hashem wants in the best possible way when you're still working on it. And this answers a very interesting question that many people have. They often tell me, hey, Rabbi, I can never be as good a Jew as you. I never learned as much as you. I didn't go to synagogue well. I'm older now. I can't really. And the answer is the real Lubavitcher Rebbe told us it's just not true at all. It's just not true at all. Part of doing Hashem's will is searching for it. So when you're working at it and you're trying to understand it and you're trying to make sense of it and you're trying to practice and get ready for it, then you're really religious. You're ultra religious because you're really involved in it. You're working at it. You're developing it. So that's very much the same thing. It's just two phases of actually fulfilling things. And I'll explain that better even with a story. So Rabbi YY said that he had a neighbor, friend of the family, a lady. She was a physicist, a psychologist. I don't know how both things go together. But anyway, bright lady. She grew up in California, sometimes in the 50s, 60s. And she grew up in a Jewish family, but a Jewish family that was very, very minimal involved in Judaism. And she went to Berkeley, and she went to college there, and she got involved in all the things in the 60s in Berkeley that was going on in the Berkeley campus. And she was very interested in Eastern religions and Sufism and spirituality and so forth. So when she had the opportunity, she left, she went off. She first went, she was interested in Christianity too. She went to Scotland and went to a convent and was baptized. And then she later went to India and she went to Thailand and she went in all these ashrams and she engaged in deep in all these things. And she was involved in every kind of practice that they do in the temples there. Some of them were obviously pure idolatry. And she did this for 4 years. And she was very, very much involved and interested in all these different practices. And then she got a message while she was in India that her father was sick And she came home to California. And there, when she was in California, her mother said, Passover is coming. And I'm so sorry that we never really celebrated a Passover, because I remember Passover as a child, and it was a wonderful holiday. So it just so happened that this woman, this young lady, she had gotten an invitation to go to a new Jewish seminary that was starting up in New York, in Crown Heights, called Machon Chana. And it was just beginning. And so she went there for Passover, and she went to for Passover, and that she spent the Seder there. The Rebbe came at night and visited all the girls who were learning in the seminary. On his way home after to his Seder, and he said he checked up at how they were doing, what they were learning. And she was very, very taken with this whole idea, because she'd never heard before about these things in Judaism. She thought it was just doing, just do with these different rituals and so forth. She didn't know it was connected to thought and spirituality and transcendence and these ideas. And she was very much taken up with it. So she was spending some time there. She was sticking around. She stayed around till Shavuos. And somebody suggested that she write the Lubavitcher Rebbe and see what he thinks about what was with her life. So she writes this very, very open, heartfelt letter to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. And in it, she explains everything that she had done in her life beforehand. And is there any way to fix it up? All the different activities that she's found, the idolatry, the Eastern religions, and all the other kinds of stuff. And she was expecting, because some of her friends there even told her, the Rebbe is going to be very harsh with you, and he's going to tell you, for what you did, you probably should do 70,000 fasts or something like that, to fix your soul and to cleanse yourself from all of this spiritual poisons that you put in it. So she was expecting a very, very strong letter back to her. And instead, she got this letter from the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said, interesting. The idea is yagati umatzati lo yagati umatzati lo ta'amim. So the Mishnah and the Gemara in Masechet Tamid says that if a person tells you, I found, but I didn't even have to work at it, don't believe him. And if he says I worked at it and I didn't find, then also don't believe him. But if you work and you find, then then I can believe you. So the Rebbe said, since you spent so much time searching, looking for Judaism, then certainly you did acquire it. So all of this, what she was doing, all these years that she was searching, he validated her. He said, you know what? You are a perfect Jew. You didn't have these opportunities. It didn't register with you. It didn't sink in. And therefore, all this preparation that you were doing is also part of the journey. It's also part of what is being a good person. So he didn't make her feel awful about herself. She made her realize, you know what? Yeah, part of being a human being is making mistakes and trying to figure things out, and you fall down a lot and you try over again and so forth. And that actually is exactly what God is interested in seeing, people who are trying to struggle with this. I thought this was a very interesting little talk and a very, very interesting idea. And, it's a foundation in how the Rebbe looks at people and how to look at people, and to see everybody on their own path. They're working at it, they're struggling at it, and they're trying to grow bigger from it. The second piece of this, and I think it's connected, I hope it's connected, is a very interesting, cute story in this week's Parsha. Of course, it's the very first Parsha that ever talks about Jewish dating. Of course, in those days, Jewish dating meant you used the shotgun. So Avraham told his servant, Eliezer, he said, listen, my boy is a very holy boy, great boy, and you got to find a wife for him, but don't go around here. He's special, and I want a very special girl, and the girls around here are not that quality. So you got to go back to my hometown and find the right kind of quality girl. He didn't. I don't know if he gave him exactly directions. Did he give him directions?
The purpose was he needed to find somebody.
I understand. Well, many things.
Because they might think like body or something.
Oh, no. Okay, so no. So he goes back, and of course, and we've talked about the story before, how he goes there and how he comes back. What I want to focus on is when he came back. When he came back with Rivka, it's the Chumash says that he came and he told Yitzchak the whole story, And like, whenever somebody gets married, you say, well, how did you meet? How did you find each other? How did you know? Who introduced you to who? So he tells her, you know what? This girl is for you. This is an amazing, miraculous story. Listen, I took an 11-day journey by camel. I got there in a few hours. It was just amazing. I don't know how it happened, to go through Lebanon and Syria and then down the Tigris River, and I got to bottom of Aram. And then I just was thinking in my head, what would be the perfect girl for Yitzhak? And I thought, well, somebody who's extra kind. So he just was thinking in his head, if I ask for some water and she gives for not only for me, but for the camels. And you know what? This girl came and she did exactly that. She gave me water. She started giving water to the camels. Camels drink 30 gallons of water in 3 minutes. She kept getting more water and more water and water, not for one camel, for 10 camels. And, she pitched her back and forth, back and forth. It was just an amazing thing. And then the Chumash says, yes, but then Yitzhak, then he took Rivka home to his tent, to his Ohala, to his tent. It's Sarah Imo of Sarah, his mother. And there he took her as a wife and he fell in love with her. And that was the story. And the Rashi feels it necessary to explain what is this meaning that Yitzhak took his new wife to his tent of Sarah, his mother. And Rashi says it's because he saw 3 miraculous things that happened when she got into the tent. The first thing was there was a cloud of Anani Kovod, the clouds of glory settled on another tent. They hadn't been there since his mother was there. The second one was that there was a special blessing on her challah that she made for Shabbos. And like my wife, have to go taste it. And the third was that her candles, her Shabbos candles, would stay lit from Shabbos to Shabbos. The Lubavitcher Rebbe in the Seicha says, I don't understand what was Rashi explaining? What was his question? This is the first thing you do when you learn Rashi. And why does he bring these 3 miracles? Because let's take it simply. Where else do you take your girl, your new wife to? You take her home. So he took her to the tent, that's where they lived. Sort of obvious, right? And what are you saying? Sarah, his mother. And where do you get this idea that there were miracles happening there? It's not in the text at all. And it's not Rashi's idea to just manufacture miracles, even if we do have measures for it, just out of the blue. It must be explaining something. So the Rebbe says, these 3 words are all extraneous. It says he married her. Obviously, he took her to the tent. So that first word to his tent doesn't need it. Sarah, whose tent is it? I mean, obviously, he says he's going back to his. What is that telling us? Why is it? It is the tent. The tent is already clear. It's the tent, and it must be the special tent. It's probably Sarah's tent. So why do you have to say Sarah? And third, why do you have to tell me it's his mother? Obviously, we all know that Sarah is his mother. So Rebbe explains, and he says, each one of these is explaining one of the miracles that Rashi's bringing. The first is, Yitzchak heard the story about this girl, but he still wasn't 100% sure that that's the right one. How do you know this is the right one for me? How do you know this is the one that Avraham wanted as the woman who's going to help found the Jewish people? How do I know that this is actually the right one? So I heard the miracles, but I wanted more signs. So the first one was there's a cloud that was on the tent. That refers to the cloud of family purity, that the Shekhinah rested on it. And we also saw the same idea as a designated place because when Yitzhak was being taken to the Akedah, to Har Moriah, there was a cloud on Har Moriah that indicated that is the place that you're supposed to go to. When you saw the cloud, the specialness, that's the special place that you're supposed to go to. So he saw the cloud, he said, wow, that's the first sign. The second one, though, is that her challah had a special blessing on it. What is that? Well, that we see especially with Sarah. That's why he says with Sarah, his mother, because earlier we have the story that when Avraham circumcised himself, these Arabs and these angels and the guys, the Arabs came and he brought them in as guests and he prepared some oxen. He gave them fresh tongue and with mustard and so forth, and he prepared food for them and he fed them. And these angels then later blessed them and so forth. But one thing he didn't do, he was working hard for these guests. but he didn't make the bread himself. He asked Sarah to make the bread. Because why? Because that's the special talent that the woman has, to be able to make the challah that really makes it. So since he left that, he knew that that was Sarah's job. That is Sarah's specific job. And certainly the idea of candles is certainly connected with mothers. Why? Because even a 5-year-old who learns the Chumash knows that the candle lighting is his mommy's job. It might be that his sister does it, but it's mainly his mother. And maybe he doesn't even have a sister. So he knows that's his mother's job, because the father, he goes out into the world and he might bring in the money, but the woman has a special power to be able to illuminate the house. And that is the blessing that was there. Why was it? Rivka seemed, and you even do that at a young age. It says in the Medrash, it says that she was 3 years old when she was married, and she was lighting candles already at 3. The Rebbe says we learn from this that a Jewish girl who has Avraham was probably lighting the candles after Sarah died, because somebody has to light the candles Shabbos night. But even so, the special blessing, the blessing that happened with Sarah's candles did not happen on Abraham's candles. The blessing that they illuminated the whole house only happened with Rivka's candles. She was able to illuminate the house, and the candles were able to illuminate for the whole week. The Rebbe goes further and he says, and you know what? That's a special blessing for every Jewish woman who's a daughter of Sarah and of Rivka and of Rachel and Leah, have this ability to be able to illuminate the house. It may not physically illuminate the house from week to week. However, when a Jewish woman lights candles in her house, she brings a spiritual element of peace that lasts from Shabbos to Shabbos. And that is the special blessing that they're able to do. And that starts even at a very young age. Even when her mother is lighting, she still has that ability to light the candles. The Rebbe then gave this important lesson for the whole world. And he said, everyone should start training their children as soon as they're able to, 3 years old. Not to light only by themselves, obviously with their mother, because they got to supervise the candle, but they should start lighting candles in their house. They should light candles in their house, because that brings a blessing to the house. It brings a blessing to the family. It brings peace to the house. And that is only possible by the Jewish woman. Avraham was not able to do that. His candles were only normal candles, but the special spiritual quality that the Jewish woman is able to bring to the house, which is what Yitzhak saw in his girl, and that's why he married her, because it continues and says, and then he married her. So only when he knew that she had that blessing, she was able to bring that light into the house, that he see this was really designated from God, and that she was able to bring that blessing in. And with that, I think.
But she could have been his child. How could he marry her if she was 3 years old? It
So
doesn't make sense.
That's the measure. So there are different opinions. 3. There's other ones that say she was 13 and so forth, because they asked her for 20. This is how they're asking questions. Certainly, he waited for her. They weren't like man and woman at 3 years old. That doesn't work. So, but she was in a dangerous situation. She was living with idolaters. If we read and then we go on the rest of the parshas, we see what kind of household she lived in, with Lavan as a brother and Besuel as a father. It was not a safe place. She had to get out of there at age 3. She was pretty strong at it. So it was pretty strong. So that's why the various Meforshim say she left at 3, is because, it was just a dangerous position to stay in. And if she stayed there much longer, it would be very dangerous for her. All right. So that's different opinions on that. But we generally don't take it as you want.
Suspend belief.
What?
We suspend.
Well, or that she was such a spiritual person that she was on some completely different level. And my wife sometimes comes home with stories from pre-kindergarten, and she says, some of the kids in these classes are like they're 40 years old. They don't walk around like little kids, something about them. They're walking around like adults, and so forth. The way they ask questions, the way they discipline their school friends or something. Because once in a while you see a kid that's just beyond the beyond, it's just not that age group, not behaving like a child. Some of them are just like, they're very precocious and so forth. So just take it as maybe as a rare outlier exception, that she was extremely precocious. Maybe that's the lesson. But I've seen it. It's just amazing. It just blows me away sometimes when I see little kids who are just like where did this kid come from? Why is he coming? Where's this coming from? So I don't have to completely suspend my belief because I've seen a little bit of this, Okay. And my wife warned me not to say that she was. Okay, I will switch over to my wife.
Thank you, Haskell Shimon.
Yes, your Koa. Thank you.
What? Okay, good. Thank you. And I'll get my water bottle. Okay, how is everybody? Good?
Good. Shalamis, I have to leave early tonight, so I want to thank you, and I'm going to listen to your part later.
Okay, good. That's absolutely.
Thank you all. Have a good night.
Okay, good. Good night. So does anyone want to say anything before we begin?
New glasses.
No, these are not new. I wish I could get more like these. They're just not my funky ones,
Okay.
but they're good ones anyway. So, sorry. Okay.
No, I wanted to say something.
Oh, good. Say something.
I was thinking I was thinking in shul this week about the Parsha, about how Rivka must have had
I'm going to put on
must have had a
are really green when I look at the screen. Go ahead. I mean, I can't see
that who was her mother, because she must have learned mitos like from somebody, because certainly not from her father.
Yeah.
And I looked, I looked all in there like to see if this said anything about her mother, if she had a mother. And then after that, I asked the rabbi, and it doesn't really ever say anything about her mother, but it's just an interesting thing that like she was able to be so Hasidic and she didn't really have a role model.
Yes.
And it would make sense that she had a great mother, and her mother is just not mentioned at all. That's all. Nothing like earth-shattering. It's just something that's always there that you don't ever really think about,
Yes, I think she's called a rose among thorns. That she grew. It was who she.
Rivka?
She's called a rose among thorns, and that's one reason that they had to pluck her out of there so quickly, because the thorns were threatening to completely dominate her, and they really had to rescue her from that place.
Wow.
And so I sometimes Ma'am Loez mentions. I don't know if you have one of those. They're so fantastic. Sometimes he mentions details like that, the little details that you don't get in the Chumash or even in Rashi. So,
but that she was a rose among the thorns, and that's why they had to take her out.
Rose among thorns is famous. That's famous about Rivka. She is well known as a rose among the thorns, and they had to get her out of there. It was a horrible environment.
So her name should have been Shoshana. I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Okay, Shoshana means rose in Hebrew. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I have to go back to work, but I just thank you for taking my comment.
Okay, our pleasure. So, anyway, welcome everybody. Haskell says this is what, 79 or 80, and thank God. And so I want to start the same way I always start, which is that we're accomplishing a lot of things tonight. Number one, the first thing to know is that we are in an extraordinary time, and I'm pleased to be in this extraordinary time with all of you. And we're going through an amazing transition, and we're doing it together, thank God. And so anyway, what is the amazing transition? It looks like anything but sometimes, but it is that the redemption of the Jewish people in the world is unfolding. And we know that because the Lubavitcher Rebbe has the most unbelievable track record for prophecies that came true. I never saw a public prophecy of the Lubavitcher Rebbe that did not come true. And they were all not things that you could predict naturally. They were wild. And when he said them, they were totally wild, but they were picked up in the media and they were repeated because people said, the Lubavitcher Rebbe is saying this, it's not going to be so bad. And each time the Rebbe was right. And the Rebbe says that what's happening now is that the redemption is unfolding. And the second thing is that our souls are handpicked. We have a purpose in being here. We have a critical role to play, each one of us. And the third thing is that we were given the right tools. We were given the Torah, which is the most amazing the most amazing piece of wisdom in the world, and nothing like it. In all my years of college and graduate school with Nobel Prize winning teachers, there was nothing like the simplest Torah class. And the last thing is that by learning about the redemption, we are actively furthering it. And the Rebbe says, the Lubavitcher Rebbe says that it is the quickest way to speed up the redemption. And also another major fact that the Rebbe hinted broadly that he is Mashiach, and that and the Rebbe this doesn't come from somebody who talked about himself a lot. The Rebbe never talked about himself. The Rebbe never gave himself credit for anything. The Rebbe never used the word I. He didn't use the word I in the when he was saying these things either. But for him to hint broadly that he is Mashiach is totally mind blowing as it was happening, and it was simply because he needed that message to get across, and it wasn't getting across clearly enough. So he broke his silence about himself a little bit. In various places, he gave various glimpses about who he is. So tonight, I actually want to talk about the power of silence. The power of silence for faith and calm and strength. And I'm going to begin with something that says in Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos is a book of ethics, and Pirkei Avos, I think there's 6 chapters, if I'm not mistaken. And in the first chapter, verse 17, it says, Shimon beno Omer, Kol Yamai Gedalti Bein HaChachamim. Shimon said, all my days I grew up among wise people. V'lo matzasi leguf tov ela shesika. And I never found anything better for the body than silence. Okay, good. That's all I'm good. That's as far as that quote is going to go. So silence, you might think silence is good for it might be good for your character building. It might be good for, no, he says it's actually good for your body. There's nothing better in the world, no medicine that's better than silence. So, and we all know that, if a person is contained, they're a contained person. They don't need external approval. And they know that they don't have to say everything. Okay. Okay. I'm going to go straight to Rabbi Akiva. So we know that Rabbi Akiva was, everybody knows the story of Rabbi Akiva. It's a true story. Rabbi Akiva was a total ignoramus. He was Jewish. He was the grandchildren of converts. And, but he was extraordinary. His family was extraordinarily poor, and he was an orphan, and he had to work for a living. He never got a chance to go to yeshiva. And by the time he was 40, he had, he knew nothing. He didn't know how to read aleph base. He didn't know, he wouldn't know an aleph upside down or right side up, or a base right side up or right side down, and wrong side, whatever. And he met an extraordinary woman, Aunt Rachel, and she convinced him she said she'd marry him if she saw his qualities, and she said she'd marry him if he would go learn Torah. And he did. And they got married. It's a huge story, but they got married, and he learned Torah at home. They had 3 kids. And then at a certain point, she said, now it's your time. I want you to go to yeshiva, the big yeshiva, which was far away. She said, don't worry, I will take care of the children. I'm very capable. And I want you to sit and learn as much as you can. And because she felt that he could become a great rabbi who could help the Jewish people. And he went off to yeshiva. And for the first 12 years, he said not one word. And his rabbis, some of them, not the rabbis, maybe his fellow students, thought this is an ignoramus. He's never raising his hand. He's never saying a word. It must be an ignoramus. But other people who watched more carefully said, no, we don't think he's an ignoramus. We think that we're going to see something. And when he first answered a question after he was there for 12 years, everybody was spellbound, just spellbound at who he had made himself, who he had become. And they immediately asked him, will you be my rabbi? I want you to be my rabbi. And he became the greatest rabbi of his time. And he didn't speak because he wanted to amass as much knowledge as he could. And he didn't want to miss a word that his teachers said. So that's one example of somebody being silent and getting incredible benefit from it. Now, in our Parsha, this is the Parsha of Rachel and Leah and Yaakov, right? So we know that if you know the classic story, Yaakov was he had asked Rachel to marry him, and she said yes, but my father's going to trick us. He's the biggest tricker in town. They also came from all the women, all the matriarchs came from difficult families, every single one of them. The patriarchs came from straight families, and the matriarchs came from thorns, and they had to fight their way. They were tough cookies, and they made themselves. They were incredible women. So Rachel's father and her brother, this was not a her father, excuse me, her father was Rivka's brother, Lavan, and anyway, so everybody knows the classic story. They were standing. And they had agreed to get married, and her father Lavan agreed to the marriage, and they were worried that there would be some kind of trick because he was a terrible tricker. And indeed, the night of the wedding, she saw they had prepared before the wedding. They had exchanged Yaakov and Rachel in case her father would do something tricky. They said, "Listen, a Jewish woman wears a veil over her face. Yeah, some thicker than others." And so he said, in case my father tries to, and she said, in case my father tries to do something, they had the secret code, a word that she would say under the chuppah, so he would know it was her. And in the last minute, on the night of her wedding, she sees her father putting the veil on Leah and leading Leah to the chuppah. And she is devastated. This is the love of her life. And she doesn't say a word because she realizes it's not my sister Leah's fault. It's our father. He's unscrupulous. He's just terrible. And if I say something, it's going to embarrass Leah in front of the entire town. I'm not going to say anything. I'm losing the love of my life, but I'm not going to say anything. And he ends up marrying Leah. And he ends up, that was in those times.
She didn't say the code word. Why not? When he didn't hear it, why not?
She gave the code. She whispered the code word to her sister when she realized what was happening. She whispered the code word to her sister, and it all works out in the wash. He marries her too. Back then, he could marry more than one person, and no longer. But many years later, it's there's a medrash that after hundreds of years after she passed away, when the Jews were being led off to the first after the destruction of the first temple, and the Jews were being led by their enemies in chains, chained ankles, leaving, they were being taken out of Israel. And it says that all the souls of the patriarchs and the matriarchs appeared before God and said, "What are you doing? This is your people. Please don't, please." And God did, and they all presented their merit. Avram said, "Hey, I was thrown in the fire." I don't remember what Abraham's merit was, but he could have said, "I was thrown in the fiery furnace, and the merit of that mitzvah, please don't do this to your children." And Yitzchak was tied up, as a whatever. Yitzchak was ready to give up his life, and Yaakov had a merit, and they all spoke up, and God didn't accept any of them. And Rachel spoke up, and Rachel said, "Father in heaven, I was in a terrible situation, and I kept silent because I was about to lose the love of my life, or I thought I was losing the love of my life, and I kept silent not to embarrass my sister." And she said, "And you, God, and I wasn't jealous. I wasn't jealous of my sister. I let her have the secret code." She said, "You, Hashem, you're punishing the Jewish people because they worshiped idols. She said, you're jealous of an idol, and I am just a human being, and I was not jealous of my sister, and I was silent. And Hashem said, Rachel, in your merit, the Jewish people are going to return to their borders. And not only Hashem was not only referring to the borders of, that they would be brought back and they would build a second temple. He was referring to us, our time now as well, that in Rachel Imenu's merit, we're going to get out of the pickle that we're in, and we're going to be brought back to Israel. And we're going to have a third temple. And in the merit of her silence, that she was able to contain herself and be silent at such an extraordinary time. And we all know about Esther also, the merit of Esther. Esther didn't say that she was Jewish. And the story of the Megillah, the Purim story of the Megillah was not, when you read it in the Megillah, it sounds like it takes place over a few weeks or a few months. The Megillah took place over 9 years, something like that, 9 or 12 years. And Esther was in the palace for years before the moment came for her. And she kept silent completely about being a Jew. She kept Shabbos and she kept kosher, but in a way that nobody noticed that she was keeping Shabbos, and nobody noticed that she was keeping kosher. And when finally the moment came, when Haman had risen and risen and risen to the height, to the zenith of incredible power, she brought him down. She brought him down by her timing was exquisite. And she said that she was a Jew at just the right moment, and his wicked kingdom collapsed. So when Reb Shimon says that I've never found anything better for the body than silence, he's really talking about something interesting. And the truth is, if you try it yourself, you will feel the power of silence. If you are in a situation where not where you have to answer, where there's something important to say. If there's something important to say, of course we have to say it. But if there's a situation where you just don't have to say everything, you don't have to have the last line. You don't have to have, there's something that could be said but doesn't have to be said. And if you don't say it, you will feel the power that you gain. You will feel the self-containment that you gain. It's an amazing thing. So not only that, silence, Hashem rewards silence at the right time. He rewards it tremendously. There is a well-known thing in Judaism that if a person is shamed in public, somebody says something devastating about them in public, if that person holds their tongue, they can then give blessings to anybody, and their blessings are going to be like the Rebbe's. I don't know if the Rebbe's, it's going to be incredible. Their blessings, they have the power to bless, and their blessings will come true. So there's I'll tell you a couple little stories. There was a story, Rebbe Ashir tells this story. There was a boy, a yeshiva student, and he was standing in line in a kosher grocery store. And there was a lady, a very rich lady in front of him. And she was putting her stuff down on the conveyor belt, and somebody, not the cashier, but somebody like the person before her or whatever had spilled something on the conveyor belt, and she didn't see, and she put her sleeve in it, and her sleeve of her designer outfit was stained, and she became livid, and she gave it in no uncertain terms to the cashier. She just I don't know how an observant woman does this, but this was, not everybody's perfect, right? And because she should know better. And she embarrassed him so much. She read him the riot act up and down, and he said not one word. And he said not one word. And she left. Now, I don't know why he said not one word. Maybe he was afraid of losing his job if he said something. But even so, even if that was or maybe he was noble and he knew this woman is, she's just, this is her problem. It's not my problem. I'm not even going to defend myself. I don't know what the reason was, but whatever the reason was, this yeshiva student behind that lady, when he gets there, he says to the cashier, I saw what you did. I saw that she ripped you apart and you didn't say a word. He said, please, I have a 47-year-old aunt, and my aunt has been married for umpteen years and she's never had children. Give my aunt a blessing, please give my aunt a blessing. And the cashier said, sure. And he gave her a heartfelt blessing, this woman he never met and he was never going to meet. And he gave her a heartfelt blessing that she should have kids. And 9 months later, to the day, she had her first child. And there's another sweet little story. I heard both of these stories from this Hasidic lady that I sometimes listen to, Mindy Meyer, not Mindy Meyer, Mindy Feldman. And oops, 1 second.
4 4 0 9.
And so it's a very sweet story. There was a I'm sure in all schools, but in Jewish schools on the last day of the year, they celebrate all their achievements, and the kids bring in, I guess in some circles, you can still bring in food from home, and in most circles that I go to, you can't bring in food from home anymore, but in these circles you could. And this story also probably happened a while ago. And so there was this young boy, and his, a sweet, sweet little boy. And he brought in a cake that his mother had worked on for hours and hours and hours. And I don't know if you know anything about Hasidic women, but some of them are the most unbelievable bakers. Like they can make a 7-layer cake that's an inch tall. They're just like, I don't know, some of them just really get into it. And there is a wisdom to it. Like for me, I'm so not that kind of person. And but there is a wisdom to it. There's, when you make delicious things for your family, there's something to it. There's something to a Shabbos where the food is exquisite. It does something, and it lasts. The impression lasts for a long time. So anyway, this woman had slaved for her kid, and he brought in this cake. Who knows? She might have made a bunch of kids on top learning Torah. Who knows what she did? And he was so proud of the cake, and it was in a box. And the boys celebrated. They had games and fun things that they did. And then was the time where everybody was going to put the food that they brought from home on the table and then have their party. And he was waiting with the box of cake, with the cake box in his hand. And another kid doesn't watch what he's doing. He rushes past him. He bangs his arm or something, and the box falls out of his hands, turns upside down, and falls on the floor. And the kid who banged him didn't even notice. He just kept running. And this kid is totally devastated. And his Rebbe, that means his Torah teacher, was on the other side of the room, and he saw the whole thing. And he's watching the kid. And he watches the kid, and the kid is not saying anything. He's just standing there. And for 20 minutes, he's fighting off. He's not crying. He's just trying to contain himself and not give it to the kid, not yell at the kid who destroyed his mother's cake. And after 20 minutes, the Rebbe sees the boy starting to cry. And he comes over to the boy and he said, listen, I saw everything that happened. Here is $20. Go to the bakery around the corner and get whatever cake you want. Just, I see that the cake is ruined. Just bring whatever cake you want. And he said, but listen, I want a favor from you. The merit that you have from holding your tongue and from not yelling at that kid and not giving him a hard time. You didn't even tell him that he ruined your mother's cake. I want that merit, if you don't mind. And the boy said, really, Rebbe? You think it was so special what I did? And the Rebbe said, yes, I think it was incredibly special. And the boy said, if that's the case, Rebbe, I don't want your $20. I'm keeping this cake. Now, the cake was in a box, so it was all squished, but it was still clean, right? So they put all their stuff on the table. And the Rebbe said, before they began, the Rebbe said, I want to tell you a story. What are we celebrating here the last day of school? We're not just celebrating that your mothers went to town and made gorgeous stuff to eat. We're celebrating that you learned a year of Torah and you learned a year of how to conduct yourselves, how to be a person in the world. And he said, I want to tell you a story. One of you, somebody didn't notice what they were doing and they ran into another kid and they caused his cake box to fall upside down on the floor and ruin the cake. And that kid worked on himself hard and did not say a thing to the boy who had caused this trouble. And so what we're doing today, we're going to celebrate that strength, that amazing strength that that child had. And what happened was all the boys lined up and they asked the kid for a piece of the squishy cake. And they all each took a piece of the squishy cake. It was apparently incredibly delicious. And it was something that they didn't forget and that the kid probably never forgot for the rest of his life. So I even have a little, one time I was insulted. It wasn't so long ago, it was last year. I got such a doozy of an insult in public. It was so unexpected and it was so not true. It was like not only something true that's embarrassing, this is something that's absolutely not true. And it was in public and I thought, oh my goodness. And then I remembered this thing that if you can give a blessing. And so it's not such a spectacular story. It's not like the last one, but I looked up and I said, Hashem, there was a guy who was, there's a Chabad rabbi who was dying of corona. It was like his last day. He was expected to die that day. And I said, please Hashem, help Rabbi Shvei. Please help Rabbi Shvei. And and that day, Rabbi Shvei had a turnaround. Now he didn't last forever. He lasted for another couple of weeks, and then another complication set in. But something happened. A little something happened, and so anyway, and I have something that I have this. I've written tons of essays that I've never published, right? And essays about life. And someday when I'm organized and I have the time, maybe I'll publish them. But one of the things that I use every week, I wrote an essay called New Cheese, Old Cheese. Maybe I've told you about it before. And in New Cheese, Old Cheese, I write down things that stopped working for me and a better thing to do instead. And one of my favorite entries is that, what was the old cheese for this entry? The old cheese for this entry, okay, I'm just going to say, when I'm in a situation, I decided that I always need to ask myself, what is my goal here? Is my goal to serve Hashem, or is my goal to be seen as perfect in somebody else's eyes? And then I wrote, so often when I'm farfetched, Yiddish word, so often when I'm farfetched, it's because my ego is suffering because somebody thinks less of me than I'd like. And then I gave myself this advice, let it go. Revel in having a mixed reputation. Just do the right thing, but revel in having and then in such a situation, and I didn't say anything to that person, never said a word. And also when people, there's some people who like to insult people. And if you have such a person in your life, if you don't answer back, it makes you much more powerful than when you answer back. It makes you it makes you feel terrific about yourself. Like, this is nonsense. I don't need to answer this, So anyway, the power of silence is good for the body. It's good for the soul, and it's great for faith and calm. It's absolutely great. And I recommend that everybody try it out. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, I'm going to end the recording, and then there is a little bit more I could say, but I'll say it next week. I'm going to end the recording.